Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pavla Niklova, and I'm the Executive Director of the Vaclav Havel Library Foundation. I would like to welcome you to the Havel Conversation live on Zoom. It is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce our distinguished guests. First, I would like to welcome Marilyn Wyatt, the Vice Chair of the Havel Foundation. She's a former diplomat who served as a cultural and public affairs officer at the US embassies in Prague and Warsaw. Since 2000, she has worked as a consultant in governance to civil society sectors around the world, and more recently as an editor specializing in development and foreign affairs. Her handbook of NGO governance has been translated into 20 languages. Apart from being the vice chair of the Havel Foundation Board, she serves on the boards of Off the Record, the oldest women's foreign policy forum in the United States, and Muslims for Progressive Values, an advocacy organization. And Marilyn will kindly introduce the Disturbing the Peace Award that the Havel Conversation has been presenting since 2016. It is my great honor to introduce Asli Erdogan, the recipient of this award in 2019. Asli is the author of 8 best-selling works of fiction and essays, including her best-known novel, The City in Crimson Cloak. Her works have been translated into 20 languages, including English, French, and German. Asli was a columnist on human rights and related topics for the newspaper Ozgur Gundem, which the Turkish government closed down in 2018 because of its pro-Kurdish position. In addition to the Disturbing the Peace Award to a courageous writer at risk, Asli has received several prizes in literature, arts, and human rights, such as the Simone de Beauvoir Prize, Karl Tucholsky Award, the Erich Maria Remarque Peace Prize, the European Cultural Foundation Award, and the Chevalier des Arts et Lettres, among others. We were very sorry that Asli couldn't come to receive her Disturbing the Peace Award in person in 2019, and so we are happy that we will finally meet her, at least on Zoom. The conversation with Asli will be led by our next special guest, Mrs. Elzbieta Matynia. Elzbieta is a professor of Sociology and Liberal Studies and director of the Trans-Regional Center for Democratic Studies at the New School for Social Research in New York. Her research in political and cultural sociology focuses on democratic transformations, gender and democracy, the borderlands of a shared Europe, and more recently on the challenges faced by democracies emerging with the legacy of violence. Her 2 recent books bring together theater of politics, performance art, and citizens' agency. An Uncanny Era, published by Yale University Press in 2014, presents post-revolutionary conversations between Europe's most emblematic former dissidents, Czech playwright and President Vaclav Havel, and Polish political thinker Adam Michnik. Her publication, Performative Democracy, explores a potential in political life presented by enacting of democracy by citizens. Written by someone who experienced an emerging public sphere within pre-1989 Poland, the book seeks to identify the conditions for performativity in public life. We are really honored to have all of you. And Marilyn, I would like to ask you to say a few words about the Disturbing the Peace Award.
Thank you so much, Pavla, and welcome Asli and Elzbieta. Pavla was really right when she said that we missed you tremendously in 2019 when you weren't able to join us in person at the gala, and it's really a treat and an honor to have you with us today. And Elzbieta, I want to thank you personally for all the work that you've done, the contributions you've made. Elzbieta served on the jury of the Disturbing the Peace Award. I think it was the same year that Asli was awarded. And so you've been a really stalwart contributor to the work that we try to do. So thank you very much. I also wanted to add that both Asli's and Elzbieta's books in English are available from your favorite online bookseller, or even better, from your the bookstore down the street from you for order. I'd like to say a few words about the Disturbing the Peace Award for those of you in our audience who aren't familiar with it. The Disturbing the Peace Award to a courageous writer at risk recognizes writers of distinguished works of fiction, literary nonfiction, biography, memoir, drama, or poetry who have been courageous in dissent and have suffered unjust persecution for their beliefs, much in the tradition of Vaclav Havel himself, who is an essayist and a playwright, was an outspoken critic of Czechoslovakia's communist regime in the 1970s, and was punished for his activism by being sentenced to several years in jail. The awardees of our Disturbing the Peace Award have also been arrested, jailed, and even tortured because of their persistent fight for human rights in countries where the authorities fear and repress those who are outspoken in expressing their belief in democratic values and the rule of law. The award helps protect the awardees with the shield of international attention, while enriching public understanding of the power of the written word to preserve and promote humanity's highest ideals. The award comes with a $5,000 cash prize, often used to help awardees with their legal fees, or in some cases, even medical bills. And starting whenever the world goes back to normal, we hope to have a residency in Prague for our awardees as well. In the past, our awardees have come from Myanmar, Turkey, Cuba, and China. They and other very outstanding candidates are nominated every year by organizations such as Amnesty International, Freedom House, and Words Without Borders. Each year, the awardee is chosen by an international jury of respected writers and human rights activists. And we're also happy to accept nominations from the public. The award process is already well along this year, so the nominations are closed, but I hope all of you listening today will bear in mind that next year, probably in about February, we'll be opening the nomination period again, and we encourage you to submit nominations of writers you know who would be suitable candidates for the award. We'll be announcing our 2021 awardee sometime in the summer, and then the award itself will be presented at our annual fundraising gala in New York on September 23rd. So please be sure to sign up for our newsletter to stay in touch with the Vaclav Havel Library Foundation about this year's award and our other innovative programming at the site where current events, international diplomacy, and the arts intersect. And now I'd like to turn it over to Asli Erdogan and Elzbieta Matynia. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome, Asli. The three of us are here in the North Coast, so it's still middle of the day. It's not very nice weather. You are in Berlin when it's already an evening, and so it's a transatlantic, very much a transatlantic communication. Asli, these are anxious times, and it is difficult today to find a rock, or using your language, a stone, perhaps, a touchstone or a guide stone that helps us to know where we are and how to move ahead. The question, of course, is where is the ahead? And so in times of crisis and confusion, such needs are often addressed by writers through the vision expressed in their works. When in late 1970s, the works of the workers of, I'm thinking about the work of Vaclav Havel, was read by the workers of the Polish Ursus Tractor factory. They read The Power of the Powerless, which was published underground. They read it and they said, now we know what to do. And that's actually quite a famous statement. And indeed, 3 years later, something emerged in Poland which changed the reality of the country. I would like us to talk about your literary work, but also about the connection to your human rights commitments, as these two dimensions very closely parallel those of Vaclav Havel, as Marilyn mentioned already. And Havel, who was already very concerned about the conditions of democracy in the first decade of our century, would be immensely distressed about it today. A bleak future for democracy, a desolate future for freedom, and our own very anxious future in a post-pandemic world. So I'd like us to start with your writing, more specifically with your extraordinary book, The Stone Building and Other Places, that book is indeed available, and it's right here. Available in the bookstores and through Amazon and so on. When I read it first, in the summer of 2018, I think, I already had at the back of my mind a very dark situation in Turkey. Once very promising democracy, right? The realistic EU aspirations that had turned violently authoritarian. I knew that you were imprisoned following the 2016 coup d'etat. As we signed the letters demanding your release, which were widely circulated around the world, and we were all following Turkey's authoritarian moves, the imposition of the state of emergency and the incredibly severe erosion of human rights. So it became very clear that the Turkish government had made a huge U-turn away from any remaining pretense of democratic rule, with massive arrests, purges at the universities, media, independent publishing, constraints upon judiciary, and a general crackdown on independent thinking. So this was the context in which I read your book. And I'm talking about, I spent a while talking about it, and in a short while it will become clear why. But I read your book, and I should add, I read it while in Poland, where democracy was being visibly chipped away as well. May I ask you to read for us a very small excerpt of your book, so that we can get a sense of the world you're capturing. And above all, a kind of a taste of a prose. And it's on page 87 of your book.
I know. It's really...
we talked, it's a short thing, but please do, yes.
Okay, I have to first give some explanation. The stone building is in 6 parts, no, 7 actually. The beginning, the humans, the stones, the dreams, the stories, the laughter, the roaring laughter, and the endings.
Yeah.
So this is from the beginning. Sorry, the beginning is singular, but we have several endings of the book. So first we read from the, excuse me for my accent in English, because when I read it becomes more clear. You don't believe me. You think I saw the stone building in my dreams, don't you? But aren't we all created from the yeast of dreams? Sooner or later, the day breaks. Blood-red streaks appear on the eastern horizon. Stars harden in the taut, motionless sky, dispersing one by one into the unseen. The last star lets a rope down towards us, so that the silenced night, the slit and bloodied words, the dispossessed shadows, the impassioned, unwanted dreams, the winged dead might grab onto it and climb up, so that all the dreams that has come to live among us and left without goodbyes might climb to the furthest reaches of the sky, where everyone and everything disappears. You don't hear me, do you? Perhaps I shouldn't have told this story in the past tense. I began the song in the wrong place again, and in the wrong key. Sorry for my English, and the rhythm is quite different. The rhythm of the original is different. That's parts I kind of stop. And I have to give some explanation, because the word yeast, Maya in Turkish, also means dreams in Sanskrit, Maya. So that there was a word play there, but it's lost in the translation.
So it's that you don't believe me. You think I saw the stone, and that paragraph ends. I began. You don't hear me.
You don't.
Do you? When I read your book in that summer, I got a very strong sense that the stone building at other places was this kind of uncanny rendition, not only of the oppression, but also of the resilience of your characters. The places you took us to, prison, hospital, exile, And so it seemed clear to me that the book must reflect your own experiences, fear, trauma, illness, loneliness, unbearable loneliness, in fact. And yet your book was written in 2009, before the turn to tyranny in Turkey. And it became evident before you were imprisoned, before you found yourself in exile, and before you found out that you are, in fact, as you put it yourself, hopelessly ill. So it appears somewhat prophetic.
Yeah.
Well, you are a writer, not a political scientist. How did you know? How did you manage to write such a book? Could you tell us about that?
Well, I have this symptom I call Cassandra symptom, which I couldn't see things, but nobody believes me. Well, this book is actually not about prison.
Yeah.
It's abstract stone building. It's the metaphor of, in fact, trauma. Everyone has a stone building. People coming from countries like ours experience it in maybe darker and earlier parts of our lives, but stone buildings always exist. And in fact, it's also the metaphor of the memory, the literature itself. It's the metaphor of itself, actually, the story. Well, when this book was first published in 2009, actually, it was also criticized in Turkey. Some people really were impressed by the language and the usage of the first person. But some people also said, this is not the language to talk about torture and prison. For this, you need a stone language, and this book is far too poetic. So it's really, I considered this question quite seriously. I took it seriously, and when I was arrested, I was with my book there. In the police station, and all the figures started to appear. The crying woman, the 3 children, except the angel was not there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and
no, go ahead.
Please go ahead.
I was trying. It's good to hear what you are saying. It's because it's poetic. You find it either in yourself or in whatever your experience and imagination takes you. I'm not really asking whether you hear the future, whether you are Cassandra, but there is this sense of kind of this veil of temporality, your kind of a priori insights, a kind of premonition, things that seem knowable quite independently of experience. I'm asking about it because I sense that your literary work, but also your very courageous journalistic pieces, columns, I sense in that work what Havel would have called perhaps ethical mobilization. One can, I think, sense that you are reaching for something that could change people's minds, that the change that is needed, that is our responsibility in prompting or encouraging what Havel would call existential revolution. So, and it is already in the power of the powerless. When the greengrocers, one needs to know, one needs to want to know oneself, and then one needs to take responsibility, and so that kind of ethical mobilization, moral mobilization, the situation of that you just described, those people were there. Those people were there. They appeared in front of you, and there is also something about the knowing, knowing too late. Right? Tragedy takes place when we know too late. When we simply do not know what we should have known. Oedipus didn't know, but the problem was that he didn't really try to know either. Anyway, so how were you arrested?
Well, I was, my apartment was busted by about, I think, over 40 policemen on the 16th of August, and 2016. And after a 7-hour search, they searched all through my library, all throughout 3,000 books. They checked one by one. I was taken to a police station. And 3 days later, I was arrested, which was quite strange because I was only on the advisory board of Ozgur Gundem. I mean, I was not their regular columnist anymore. I was not their journalist or.
This is a Turkish pro-Kurdish Ozgur Gundem, right?
Yes.
Really
Yes.
functioning daily newspaper.
Yes, it was legal, and I kept reading it even in the prison. It came even to prison. A totally legal newspaper, and a totally symbolic advisory board, which consists of a writer, a publisher, a feminist journalist, an ecologist. Only one of us was in active politics, a parliamentary, but only two of us, the linguist and me, got arrested. It was such a strange, I mean,
Both women,
case.
right?
Yeah, we were both women. Yeah, I said we were in the same ward, and she had written actually this book as prophetic, apocalyptic sides. She was one of the first critics to write about stone building. She really had praised it. So my book critic and me were in the same prison. I mean, this is really
because
Turkey.
you envisioned the future.
I don't know.
And she approved of that vision. Yeah.
Yes, in fact, it turned out to be like that. And we had a lot of tension in prison, though. I think I disappointed her. So it's.
What was the charge? What did they charge you with?
Well, they charged me with the heaviest article available at that moment, which was actually punished with death until 2000 or something, when death punishment was banned. It was called Destruction of the Unity of the State. I mean, I can't help smiling when I say it. What destruction, what unity do they mean? And yeah, this is the article Abdullah Öcalan was convicted from. It basically means you form an army to destroy and divide a state, or I mean, something like this. It's really heavy. Yeah. So they asked literally aggravated life sentence for me, which is the equivalent of the death sentence in the past.
You know, I cannot help but, and I understand it's something else, and things are never the same. It is hard to resist when you hear that the official charge was destruction of the unity of the state. It's kind of hard to resist that, after all, you are a recipient of the Vaclav Havel Disturbing the Peace Award. And Paul Wilson, who is this extraordinary, translated but above all extraordinary insider when it comes to Havel's literary and intellectual legacy, explained once this disturbing the peace. It was a popular offense, or perhaps poor excuse for an offense, namely the crime of hooliganism, and served as a real justification for the interrogation, imprisonment of Czech and Slovak dissidents, you know, in 1970s. And it seemed to me that the charge you were presented with sounds somewhat similar. I understand that what is below it might be different, the underlying might be different, but I understand that you were eventually acquitted of the...
Yes, but my acquittal was also taken back. They restarted the court case. I think back in July.
So last year. So
yeah. I'm still on trial. It's been
so
almost
3 years
5
ago.
years.
You were acquitted, and then that you were reinstated. Your charge was reinstated.
Yes. So it's been almost 5 years now. I'm on trial.
Could you take us to the women's prison in Istanbul? Woman reporter and political prisoner, 2017, Istanbul, and what? And that's we're in a separate part of prison. What was it?
Well, I was, arrested in a particularly bad time. It was just 1 month after the attempted coup or whatever it was. So Turkey was a big arrest factory. I mean, when I was about to be arrested, there were 800 people in front of me. So as a privilege, they took me to in front of the line. 800 men, all soldiers. With plastic handcuffs, seated on the ground, like it looks like a concentration camp, so crowded. So the prison was also, the prisons had reached their limits, started to overflow. Every day came new prisoners. I was in a kind of a light prison, Bakırköy. It is only for women, which makes it a bit softer. Male prisons are tougher. And it's mostly for what we call common crimes, common criminals. This is the terminology of the law, not my own. Common crime and crimes of terrorist acts. Actually, Turkey does not use political prisoners.
Uh-huh.
I was a prisoner of terrorist act. And it was mainly for common criminals. So this also softened the condition a bit. We were about 1,000 women, and I think only around 50 to 60 were political prisoners at that time. But very soon there came another group of women, around 200 from the Fethullah Gülen, allegedly Fethullah Gülen movement, but they were all sorts of women, from pilots to nurses who worked in Gülen hospitals. And it's like flowing. So soon they became 200, and our numbers stayed around 60. But still, we were the minority. It was a prison now became around 1,200, and the rules were suddenly changed. It became suddenly quite strict, like junta days. Photography was forbidden. They forbid all plants. They collected all plants just before my arrest. So for me,
what plants? Greenery?
The women in the prison were allowed to grow plants, little flowers and all this thing. And even our ward had a little tree. It takes so many generations to bring up these trees in the courtyard, which there is no soil. It's all stone. And then they collected them at one gathering, and they put them out in the upper courtyard, which we could never see, but sometimes the parliamenters came to visit me. So I would be taken to a special guest room to meet the parliamenters. And on the way, I would see the outer courtyard, and there were like hundreds of plants left to die, rotting under rain, and the winter was coming. So this is for me the image of the women's prison. These hundreds of plants slowly dying in the courtyard. So yeah, it was a tough time. I was initially treated quite badly, but soon I became a privileged prisoner, and I had good relations, surprisingly, with everyone, the guards, the authorities, the prisoners. I was extremely polite and soft-spoken, and this kind of influenced people. So, but still it's easy. It's not easy. I mean, prison is prison. It was very cold, very cold. Around 10 degrees, you have to leave and sleep and eat, and it's really heavy.
I wanted us to talk about being a dissident. Havel, before he became president, was known as a dissident writer, and a category that was really introduced generally to the Soviet blog by Western correspondents and commentators who wanted to explain the phenomenon of kind of looming dissent, and in the mid-70s and 80s. And it was kind of a end of the Cold War, more or less. Which supported the dissent, flying universities, printing houses, that provided a kind of a support for dissidents, So the term covered people who published their work in illegal publications, printers who locked themselves for days to print those publications in the garages or secluded places, people who smuggled stuff from abroad, from staplers, from Sweden to paper, and then people who sold those things on this, to the readers. It kind of began when I'm talking about it. So it was also kind of a growing infrastructure that supported them. So do you think of yourself as a dissident? Who are today's dissidents? When you think about your friends in Turkey, who made the decision to live in truth and resist authoritarian power, and who have often paid an exorbitant price for making such a choice, do you think about them as dissidents? Do you think about?
Sorry.
Do you think about yourself as a dissident, or does the term dissident still work even?
Well, I think with me, I think no term works. I'm a writer and I'm a bit troubled. These are, not for me to decide at the very end. It's some other people's definitions and stamps. And in a way, it's easy. It would be too easy to say I'm dissident. But, well, there's always a big question mark in any kind of I am this statement. I ended up in this role of oppositionary, let's put some lighter word. When I started my column back in '98 in Radical, and I didn't come up with I didn't have this ideal of, destroying the unity of the great Turkish state and the peace of people. I was just, like my literature in my column, I wanted to tell the story of the victim. I was a very lonely, kind of impromptu voice that I didn't really belong to a group, or I didn't feel the support of people around me. I was simply telling the story of the victim. The Kurd was maybe much later I discovered. I told the prisoner, the rape victim, the blacks, racism, all this, and only individual stories in a way. And I didn't actually realize how many taboos I was touching with just one essay on raped Kurdish girls by the paramilitary. I suddenly touched the female question, as I jokingly say this term, female question, the Kurdish question, the militarism. And I got my first death threats. I was not really aware of why I was considered to be so important to be threatened. And now I look back, it was the good old days, maybe. Even the hard 90s were, compared to what we are going through now, is really like good old days. Today, all my friends, yes, we ended up all being dissidents, but we are all more or less silenced. Most of my friends are either abroad, some have committed suicide. One of my friends jumped out of the court building. And the rest some are in prison or facing prison. So we are, by definition, yes, we are dissidents, and there is resilience, still a lot of resilience in Turkey. Otherwise, they would stop arresting us. So we are still speaking, and they are arresting. But the situation is very grave, actually. I think much graver than what's represented in the European press. People simply cannot imagine. They think they know, but knowing is something else. It's our perhaps reason of existence, the writers, to share something that could be called knowledge, but I believe it can be shared.
It's interesting what you're saying, and I'm rather sure that you didn't read, did you? I don't think so. This book, Disturbing the Peace, which is this interview, lengthy interview with Havel. It's extraordinary what you just said. I think you would recognize yourself in this quotation that I have in front of me. So here is what he's writing. I am a writer, and I've always understood my mission to be to speak the truth about the world I live in, to bear witness to its terrors and its miseries. In other words, the warning rather than hand out prescription for change. Suggesting something better and putting it into practice is a politician's job. I've never been a politician and never wanted to be. Now he is talking about it in 1986 or maybe 85, whenever the interview was conducted. It is true that I've always been interested in politics, but only as an observer and a critic, not as somebody who actually does it, and so on. So, but I am a writer, and I always understood my mission to speak the truth.
And I mean, I thought this is like my very limited contribution to peace, actually, or to self-confrontation, or building up the conscience, individual, collective conscience. I mean, literature could be, it's somewhere between me and you, I and you. I can take the reader there. And it becomes political eventually. It is a political literature, let me put it this way. But my main intention or ambition was not that to be oppositionary or this. Maybe that's why my first column, The Others, had a very heavy impact, actually. I had suddenly a big audience. I was suddenly in the center of attention. Didn't realize why. It's not me, I think it's Turkey. Turkey has so many taboos. I mean, the moment you say, you are already a dissident. I mean, everything is forbidden. You can't talk about Armenians, about Kurds, about gays. And so it's really surprising, actually. And in fact, I'm a bit ashamed of, on their behalf, I'm ashamed of what they have done to me and people like me. We are.
Asli, you are in exile now.
Yeah.
The writer in exile is not a rare figure, particularly not rare in the last 200 years or so, except that today, the world is much more interconnected, but it's also much more murky. Safe places are harder to come by. Democratic politics and life under democracy in general are questioned, and not just by the elected leaders turned dictators, but in many places are questioned by the people. You live in Berlin, in cosmopolitan Berlin. You are widely translated. I also noticed that you were translated in Romanian, Swedish, Bulgarian. I mean, and as I discovered, the bits of your things are translated into Polish, but the books have to still come up, and we'll make sure that they will. How is it to be a writer in exile in that kind of different world, this kind of world, globalized, strange world of today, the globalized world in which is still trying to impose border and reinstate border when they began to weaken? How is it to be a writer in exile?
Well, for me, again, there was the premonition, because all my characters are sort of in exile, especially the city in Crimson Cloak, Ozgur, their exile is like their state of being. And I always believe this is our oldest story and oldest metaphor. To be a human being is to be in exile. But to talk of metaphors is something else. But then there is the actual bitter reality of not being able to go back home, which I experienced very cruelly this week because I have a serious disease, which I'm again in an attack at the moment, actually, of this disease. And I lost my father. I couldn't even go to a funeral. There's this actual harsh reality, and the world is, as you said, is changing, and we are not in the 60s, good old 70s. I mean, the world is, there is a big ultra-right wing rising everywhere, and the main target nowadays is the immigrant, the refugee. I am the unwanted, and I feel it. No matter you can be a famous writer or this or that. The moment I go to an office or an official state, I feel it. That I'm not wanted. I felt it in Turkey too. I was not wanted, but there I could take it more easily. Kind of, it was normal. Here I react, and also, I mean. I'm a writer basically, and my main, I'm not a good storyteller, I'm not a novelist. My style is more like poetic prose, which is very much language based. I mean, I write with words, with the whispering of the words, with their shadows. And now I'm losing my language. I'm exiled from my language. And this started even in prison. I mean, the prison is such a trauma that it really puts a gap between you and your language. It becomes the language of the authority. The break started in prison, and my only land is my language, and now even that is almost taken from me. I think exile is quite a difficult experience. I mean, it's comparable to prison, and some things you only understand when it happens. But of course, I'm not the first. I will not be the last. This is a self-repeating story, and even in Berlin, we are such a big group of writers, journalists, actors, rap musicians, academicians, and there's a common expression in Turkish. We are like fish out of water. All are depressed, and we have lost our language in a way. All of us, not only the writers, but all of us have lost this language. And so I wish I could have said something more positive about it. But
I'm going to ask you about positive things, but I understand absolutely what you are saying. I once was a very avid reader of a very dark poetry by Paul Salan, whose relationship to language was very.
I'm a fan of.
Because he wrote in German.
Yeah, the language he heard in the camps. Yeah.
Victims of the Holocaust. Yes, I'm sorry, I have to close the door because it's cloud. It's something's happening outside of the house. So I understand how the relationship, peculiar relationship to the native language, could be destroyed when it becomes the language of power of the power which is imposed over us. And I think in exile, that irony is even stronger perceived. Yeah, and the situation of pandemic, I think, didn't help. When did you move to Berlin?
Well, I came a bit late. I was supposed to come in September 19, but then, as you know, perhaps I had severe health problems. I had 2 surgeries. So I came in January, then went to France, then came back in March, and 2 weeks after me came pandemic. So I was really caught in a totally new city. It was really traumatic here. So.
I feel that I'm very, I like Berlin. This was the first place, which was the kind of Western place I saw, and people were coming on the streets, and they had this yeah, I'm not going to go into it, but I absolutely understand how difficult it is to be there and not to be there, right? Not to be present,
Yes.
and to actually, and not to, and to have this void around you. So I want to ask us to talk about something more positive. I think we need that, and I think it's possible, and your books can help us with that too. This book is really a book about darkness, but it is also a book about light. The light which in very inconspicuous way squeezes itself through the cracks, and suddenly, even if briefly, it shines, it illuminates, it lit something that otherwise we would not be able to see, could not be seen. So for me, in that book of darkness, your light is my hope. Could we talk about hope? And I'm really, when I think about hope, I really do not talk about optimism. Optimism is something else than hope. So I want us to find hope. Where can we? Havel was very, very big about that, and we can return here to start with. He had his own definition of hope. He's again in Disturbing the Peace, the book that I'm going to send you, buy on Amazon and send you, because I don't think you can get it in Europe. He says hope is definitely not the same thing as optimism. It is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out. Talk to me about
Yes, well, in this book, The Stone Building, in fact, in all my writing, maybe the sacred and the profane are together and side by side, arm to arm. And there is this book, The Angel and the Madman. They have the same scar. There is a scream of torture, but there is also a roaring laughter. And there is a choir, but they are tortured children. And there is a tune. All throughout the book, there is this missing tune. And there is someone missing. One will not come out of the building, stone building. All the others will, but one is missing. Probably, or perhaps, we never know the end of the angel. It's a stray angel rather than a fallen angel. He dropped a tune as he was leaving, like the dreams that came and tried to stay with us, but couldn't. And they didn't say a farewell even. Like those dreams, or like the dead, the angel goes. We don't know. We have to find his end. But there is the scene, the madman. They are kind of replicas of each other. Is walking out on the rooftops. And I think, because it's almost impossible to go into his eye in first person, it doesn't really exist. He's looking for, I think it could be interpreted, he's looking for this tune. There was this song, or not even a complete song, a tune that he heard in the stone building, only there. And perhaps this is what the angel dropped while he was going on. And there, I think he's actually looking for this tune, and he hears it. He hears the same choir. It's a group of people that are gathering in the street. They are actually telling him, jump, jump, jump. They want to see a suicide. But he hears it as the call of the eternity, which it is the call of the eternity. And he finds the tune. In fact, yes, as I said, the sacred and the profane in the human being is just put together. I mean, that is the autobiographical scene. I saw it. That's, yes, the tune. And in the end, actually, the writer also looks for the tune, tries to sing it, and it's lost. And I would like to tell you one more thing about hope. I just remembered yesterday about plants. when the plants were collected from the prison, they smuggled in seeds, and they tried to grow in a basil plant, basilic.
The prisoners smuggled the seed.
In my ward. And they found it again, and they took our basil plant. And then, of course, there's no soil. How do you make soil? I saw it, I witnessed them, took part of it. They take the tea leaves, they dry them, takes weeks, and then they fertilize with egg, the shell of the egg. And then seeds are smuggled in. And this thing is put to rainwater in the courtyard. And after weeks and weeks after, Kate sprouted some little, really ugly plant. And it was our really little prince. We were all in love with this. Everybody took it to the court for more rain, for sun. And eventually it was caught and taken from us again. But this thing again started drying of the tea leaves. I think this is but when people ask me about hope, I tell this story. I mean, this is really this little plant, and I saw it coming out of the almost impossible from the tea leaves. And again and again and again, this plant was kept alive with 22 women together. And this is hope, I think.
When you were talking earlier about this tree, this is incredible story. This is incredible story, about women, protecting that green life. There, women who are locked out of nature, out of everything. But you mentioned it earlier about this tree which grew in this strange place, the place that should not have allowed the tree to grow out because there was just a concrete floor, concrete ground. But yet it did. And when you were talking right now about it, I thought that Turkey itself experienced moments of hope and this extraordinary moments, extended moments of civic mobilization and performative citizenship.
2015
Gezi Park. We all were glued to the screens to see that.
Yes, really. I was there.
Absolutely. We were 2015. Elections.
13. Elections.
Elections. Right. That Gezi Park 2013, but then elections 2 years later.
Yes.
And then you had this constitutional referendum, and right in 17. And there was this Justice March. I try to kind of refresh myself with that. And even more recent about that, I even wrote municipal elections. You have a mayor of Istanbul. I mean, when that happened, right? When they repeated, because it was not clear, right? In 2019. There were repeated elections, and Istanbul has a mayor who is not linked to Justice and Development Party, to AKP, but it's kind of expression of citizens' will. So I feel when I combine those two images, the kind of the people on the streets and people together and people trying to change their lives by opening the space for conversation and for democracy. And then when I hear your story about the plans, I feel that indeed hope is about taking action, doing something, confronting the reality, enacting dreams and ideas.
I was part of the Gezi uprising, and I have still some deep skin burns in my arms from the acid they used, and I'm very proud of these scars. And honestly, it was probably the happiest 17 days of my life. I mean, it was really incredible, almost a miracle. This feeling of being anonymous, being this solidarity, which again I experienced perhaps in prison, similar solidarity, but it was so different from anything I had experienced that far and so far. And it's really, you can't believe that human beings can be so together and so much caring and loving for each other. And yes, it was a very equalitarian movement, and it was, you know, it didn't have a leader. It just happened. Nobody even predicted it, and you know, nobody came out with big ideas saying equality and no hierarchy. It was just like that from the very start, a totally equal level movement that brought so many people together.
My Czech friends often are telling me, my Czech and Slovak friends are often telling me that when about this big gathering on the major plaza of Prague, when when Havel came to the balcony and suddenly, you know, in fact, like that, the dark times were over, at least. Yes, at least then. So
well, I think there are some.
It was incredible, the kind of joy of being in it together, right? Kind of almost like democratic joy, I would say.
These are like moments that you wish the time would freeze. But you know, as the writer of the stone building, I know better than maybe.
So I want
to. These are only moments, and you know, they are very quickly lost.
Stop right there.
Okay.
The end moments are ending, and we can. Asli, we have only 2 minutes left.
Really?
I know. I'm looking at my computer here, and I would like to ask you to conclude this conversation with a paragraph that comes at the very end of your stone building.
Okay. Yes, I'm sorry, I talked too much.
No, you didn't. You didn't. It's just the time. Is, you know, I wish we could stay longer, and perhaps we will have another conversation in some other context. So it's 171. Please take a look.
Yeah,
you had it. Okay, good. Go ahead.
May I start?
Yes, go ahead, please. Mm-hmm.
As for me, each time I explained myself incorrectly, in the wrong place at the wrong time, resorting to a language that was either too dry or too tragic. I strung together 4 or 5 hollow words, as dreadful as a skeleton, speaking in unyielding silences, in words more muted than spoken. Or, as if life was suddenly demanding to be narrated, described, expressed, I spouted lifeless metaphors, verbs stretched tight as a bowstring, images in search of their true forms, until I had no strength left. I wandered among the walls of words, row after row, groping my way forward, like an apparition in the moonlight. I entered my story uninvited, a story that is no less unfamiliar even to me, my makeshift, formless story.
Hollowed out, worn away by winds, covered in sand and rainwater at birth. Thank you very much, Asli.
Thank you. Thank you.
We will turn the screen to Marilyn and Paula.
I would like to, Asli, thank you so much for being here, and Elzbieta, you for leading this wonderful conversation. It was absolutely unique and special, and I'm so happy that you could be with us and tell us, Asli, your story. I'm so sorry for everything that you've suffered in your life, and I do also see hope in your writing, and I absolutely love the image of the plants, and I believe all of us need hope right now when the world is still kind of deciding which way it's gonna go in terms of politics and empathy. And I know that you wrote really beautifully in your letter when you couldn't come to accept your award, you wrote how writers, that it's their mission to present truth and to present what's happening around us, and that it's like walking among shattered glass and picking up those little words that together form hopefully some meaning or message or a story of someone else. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I don't know if you can still stay. I have definitely one question here from Marilyn, and I can encourage our audience, if you'd like to ask something, you can send your questions through Q&A. I know that Marilyn would like to ask, Asli, given both your impact and your suffering in Turkey, are you still politically involved, or have you found a sort of exile in literature too?
Well, I mean, literature for me is not, yeah, sometimes it's an escape, but what you escape from is actually becomes the real true confrontation. So, and I have, of course, enormous feelings of the guilt of the survivor in a way, because so many of my friends are in prison. Osman Kavala is one of them. Ahmet Altan and I kept in correspondence. So you can't really forget. And I mean, I wish I could just go home and listen to my Bach and read poetry, but no, there is the urgency. And I try my best. Of course, I have no more means. I don't have a column now. But I try my best to at least speak in the conferences, discussions. And whenever a microphone is forwarded to me, I try to tell what is happening in Turkey. I mean, even that takes so much time before I could come to a solid conclusion. Even telling the facts takes so much effort and time. So I kind of have this mission on myself. I think I just can't really, while they are in prison and while they are still suffering, and this is increasing day by day, I can't sit back and enjoy anything, in fact.
And maybe if that could be a question for both of you, if you are working on any new book at the moment.
Well, I've recently published my poetic prose, which is, I think, is my most important book in terms of key position in my writing. Is a Requiem for a Lost City, published in France. Now I'm going to do a second Requiem, but I'm also very much torn. I mean, because of these diseases and all this and that. But I promised myself to write a prison book if life gives me enough time, because I do need a lot of time for that. To digest it a bit more. It's something. It's my cross on my shoulders to write about the Bakırköy prison.
And I'm working on a book which I was hoping to finish, but the COVID didn't allow me to finish last fall, on ironies of resistance, ironies of political resistance. And it is the book which brings together the experiences of our part of the region, Eastern Central Europe, but also Sub-Saharan Africa, more specifically South Africa.
So thank you very much. And we are definitely looking forward to reading all your new words on paper, on our internet, or everywhere we can, and hopefully translate them also into more languages. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'd like to thank our audience also. Also, we are a non-profit, so I would like to thank for all donations and contributions, which you can still make on our website or on Eventbrite. And my very last thing is to invite everyone for our next event, which will be actually live. It will be our annual festival honoring Václav Havel that we call Rehearsal for Truth. It will take place at the Bohemian National Hall in Manhattan from June 22nd till 30.
In person?
In person.
Ah.
In person. We're going for it. We will observe all the public health protocols, and we will change them according to the evolving situation. But you will see, for example, a premiere of Václav Havel's Audience by Czechoslovak American Marionette Theater. So that will be a special. And then also a wonderful Polish play by Witkaczy, the Madman and the Nun. So we are looking forward to those two full productions, plus some stage readings and installation. And so hopefully you will come to see us, and maybe Asli will join us at least on Zoom for some other events.
I would love to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very
so much.
Thank you. Thank you.